The air in the obsidian spire was as cold and ancient as the stone from which it was carved. It was a chamber built for giants and gods, a place where the weight of a dying star was less than the gravity of the words spoken within its echoing vastness. At its center, a column of light, impossibly slender and pure, rose from a seamless floor to a ceiling lost in engineered darkness, illuminating the grand sovereign's dais. Around it, suspended in the silent air upon thrones of solidified light, sat the High Council of the Cathar Imperium. Their faces, a tapestry of noble chitin and weary flesh, were illuminated by the holographic projection that dominated the space between them, a tactical map of their galaxy, rendered in breathtaking, agonizing detail. A significant portion of that map, a swirling wound on the galactic arm they called home, was no longer shimmering with the blues and golds of star systems. It was a spreading stain of absolute black, a creeping void that consumed light, life, and hope. They called it the voracious silence. It did not conquer, it erased. Grand Sovereign Vorlag, his carapace a lattice of cracks that spoke of centuries of rule, rested his multifaceted hands upon the onyx dais. His gaze was fixed on the encroaching void, each lost system a personal failure etched into his soul. The silence was not an enemy one could fight with fleets and armies in the traditional sense. It was a plague of physics, a self-replicating miasma of nanoscopic entities that broke down matter at a fundamental level, converting it into more of themselves. It was entropy given a hunger. Worlds, stars, nebulae, all were reduced to a quiescent, uniform gray dust that emitted no energy, reflected no light. A perfect, final stillness. "The outer arm is lost," a voice, sharp and resonant as striking crystal, declared. It belonged to General Kalen, Lord of the Imperium's fleets. His own throne of light was tinged with the crimson of command, and his posture was as unyielding as neutronium. "The bastion at Cygnus X1 has fallen. The star itself was consumed in less than a standard cycle. The fleet sent to hold the line, they did not report destruction. They simply ceased to exist, their signals vanishing from one moment to the next." A low murmur like the grinding of tectonic plates moved through the council. It was not a sound of surprise, but of grim, exhausted confirmation. They had seen this 100 times before on the tactical display. A fleet, a world, a star represented by a proud icon of Cathar might would approach the edge of the silence. And then it would be gone. No explosion, no energy flare, no debris, just absence. "Our long-range auguries predict the silence will reach the core worlds within 12 rotations," another council member, a wizened archivist named Lyraxis, stated. Her voice was soft, yet it carried the immense weight of the Imperium's history. "Catharia Prime, this very world, will be consumed. All that we are, all that we have ever been, will be rendered into inert dust. The grand chronicle of the Cathar will end not with a final chapter, but with the book itself being unwritten from existence." Silence, a profound and terrible irony, descended upon the chamber. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of 1,000,000,000 souls already lost, and the premonition of trillions more soon to follow. Vorlag's ancient mind drifted, remembering a time when this hall had rung with debates of expansion, of art, of philosophy. Now it was a tomb in waiting, a place where they met only to chart the progress of their own extinction. "You have exhausted every strategy," Kalen continued, his voice laced with a frustration so deep it bordered on fury. "We have thrown fleets against it, attempting to saturate it with firepower. The energy was absorbed without effect. We have attempted to ignite stars in its path to create firebreaks of supernovas. The silence consumed the expanding energy shells as if they were nothing more than mist. We have utilized gravitic shearing, temporal displacement, dimensional phasing. Nothing impedes it. It is not a force to be fought. It is a fundamental law of the universe asserting itself upon us." Vorlag slowly raised his head, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the dying galaxy in 1,000 fractured images. "Then we will die as Cathar," he intoned, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the very stone of the spire. "We will face the end with the dignity our ancestors bequeathed to us. We will not be forgotten, for there will be no one left to forget. We will become one with the great quiet." It was the doctrine that had guided their civilization for millennia, the philosophy of sovereign solitude. Each civilization, they believed, was a solitary island in the cosmic ocean. It rose on its own merits, and it fell on its own. To ask for aid was to admit the failure of one's own existence, a shame more profound than death itself. They had watched younger race. Rise and fall, never interfering, offering only silent observation as a form of cosmic respect. It was the honorable way. It was the Cathar way. But now, that way was leading them into oblivion. Sovereign, Lyraxis's soft voice cut through the funereal acceptance. All eyes turned to her. The archivist rarely spoke with such force. There is another way, a path we have not considered because our pride has forbidden it. Kalen's mandibles clicked in irritation. If you speak of appealing to the old ones sleeping in the galactic core, we have already established they cannot be awakened. If you speak of some forgotten superweapon in the archives, you know we have searched and found nothing. I speak of neither, Lyraxis said, her gaze steady as she met the general's glare. She gestured, and a small section of the holographic map expanded. It was a region on the far side of the galactic arm, a messy, chaotic cluster of stars that the Cathar had long deemed unremarkable. It was colored a faint, neutral blue on their charts. I speak of them, the humans. A wave of disbelief and contempt washed through the council. The humans, a young race, barely spacefaring by Cathar standards, having only left their home system a few scant centuries ago. They were a chaotic, emotionally volatile species, prone to internal conflict and bizarre cultural expressions. Their expansion into the galaxy had been erratic, unplanned, and inefficient. They were loud, broadcasting their crude dramas and cacophonous music across all frequencies. The Cathar had observed them with a kind of detached pity, seeing them as children playing with powerful toys they did not understand. The humans, Kalen scoffed, the sound like rock grinding on rock. The brawling apes from the Sol system, what could they possibly offer us? Their ships are crude kinetic vessels, their energy outputs are laughably primitive. They still encase their consciousness in fragile shells of flesh and bone. They are ephemeral, a brief flicker in the galactic timescale. To ask for their help would be the ultimate humiliation, a dying god begging for aid from a microbe. Their expansion is not inefficient, General, Lyraxis countered calmly, her voice cutting through his disdain. It is organic, unpredictable. Where we build in perfect geometric lines of conquest, they spread like a living forest, sending out roots and branches in 100 different directions at once. And while their technology may appear crude, it is also incredibly resilient and adaptable. Our observers have noted their ability to innovate under pressure is unprecedented. They do not have a word for an unsolvable problem. They simply redefine the parameters of the solution. She paused, letting her words sink into the heavy air. And there is more. Their communications, which we have long dismissed as noise. Our deep archive linguists have recently decoded underlying patterns, mathematical constants woven into their broadcasts, hidden beneath the layers of entertainment and chatter. It is a language of profound complexity, a meta-language that speaks of concepts our own philosophers have only just begun to contemplate. We have underestimated them. We have seen only the chaotic surface and ignored the impossible depths. Vorlag listened, his ancient mind sifting through her words. He had seen the human broadcasts. He had witnessed their strange wars, their passionate art, their bewildering sentimentality. He had dismissed it all as the hallmarks of an immature species. But Lyraxis was the keeper of their history, the guardian of their collective knowledge. Her insights were never offered lightly. "What are you proposing, Archivist?" Vorlag asked, his tone neutral. "We send a message," she said, her voice ringing with a desperate conviction. "We transmit a full account of the voracious silence. We show them what is coming. We do not beg. We do not plead for salvation. We offer them data, a warning, a final testament from a dying race so that they might have a chance to prepare, a chance that we did not have. It is an act that preserves our dignity, yet it also opens a door. It is a seed of communication, planted in the hope that something, anything, might grow." Kalen surged to his feet, his crimson throne flaring with his anger. "A warning? You would give them the tactical data of our empire's greatest foe? You would expose our weaknesses, our desperation to these primitives. They would see it as an invitation to scavenge our ruins. They would descend upon our dying worlds like vultures, picking the bones of our civilization clean before the silence can claim them. It is madness." "It is a calculated risk," Lyraxis replied unbowed. "And it is the only risk we have left to take. What is the alternative, General? To die in silence, clinging to a pride that will be atomized along with our bones? Is it not the greater pride to ensure that the knowledge of our existence and the nature of our end survives us? We thought no one would come for us because our philosophy demanded we face the dark alone. But perhaps that philosophy was a cage of our own making. Perhaps we were not as wise as we believed." The chamber fell into a deep, contemplative quiet. Vorlag looked from the furious general to the resolute archivist. He looked at the encroaching darkness on the map, a stain that had consumed his children, his worlds, his legacy, sovereign solitude. It had felt so right, so noble for so long. It was the bedrock of their identity. But a bedrock could also be an anchor holding a ship in place as the tide went out, leaving it stranded and broken on the sand. The humans were an unknown variable, a chaotic element in a perfectly ordered equation of despair. But they were also the only variable left. His decision was made. The weight of it settled upon him, a mountain of tradition and fear. But beneath it, a tiny, unfamiliar spark flickered. It was not hope. Hope was a luxury his people had forgotten. It was possibility, a single, unwritten path in a forest of dead ends. "Send the message, Archivist Lyraxis," Vorlag commanded, his voice resonating with the finality of a closing tomb. "Transmit everything. Our history, our science, the full data profile of the voracious silence. Add a personal addendum from me. State that the Cathar Imperium faces its final hour. We do not request aid, for our fate is our own. We offer this data as our final contribution to the cosmic record. Let it be known that we existed." Kalen stood frozen for a moment, his posture a sculpture of disbelief and betrayal. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he resumed his seat, his field of light dimming to a smoldering ember. He did not speak. He did not have to. His silence was a judgment, a condemnation of this final, desperate act of a fallen empire. The council was adjourned. As the thrones of light faded and the council members departed, only Vorlag and Lyraxis remained. The holographic map continued its silent, horrifying advance. The black stain grew, imperceptibly but unstoppably. They had cast their message in a bottle into the cosmic sea. Now there was nothing left to do but wait for the tide to come in and wash them away forever. The cycles that followed were the longest in Catharia's history. An entire civilization held its breath, suspended between a desperate, unspoken hope and the certainty of annihilation. The message had been sent, a tight-beam transmission aimed at the heart of human-controlled space. It was a spear of information traveling at the absolute limit of physical law. The Cathar did not know if it would be received, or if received, understood, or if understood, cared about. The humans remained silent. No acknowledgement was returned. The void of their response was as terrifying as the encroaching silence itself. General Kalen used the time to fortify the core worlds, a futile but noble gesture. He organized evacuation arcs, vast world ships designed to flee into the intergalactic void, though he knew as well as anyone that they were merely coffins with a longer journey. The silence was expanding faster than any ship could flee. It was a race that had been lost before it had even begun. The mood across the Imperium was one of profound, orderly grief. There were no riots, no panic. The Cathar, in their ancient dignity, prepared for their end. They recorded their final epics, sang their last hymns, and said their long goodbyes. The Empire was dying, and it was doing so with a grace that was heartbreaking to behold. Sovereign Vorlag spent his hours on the dais in the obsidian spire, watching the map. He watched as the Pithar Nebula, a stellar nursery that had birthed Cathar sons for 1 billion years, was snuffed out like a candle. He watched as the binary stars of Regulus, a symbol of eternal union in their mythology, were separated and then extinguished, one after the other. Each loss was a physical blow. He felt his empire being dismembered system by system. Lyraxis's gamble had failed. The humans were not coming. They were, as Kalen had predicted, either too primitive to understand, too weak to act, or too callous to care. The Cathar were alone, as they had always been. The doctrine of sovereign solitude had not been a choice, but a simple reflection of reality. Then, on the 12th cycle since the message was sent, just as the silence began to lick at the edges of their home system's outer asteroid belt, something happened. It was not a reply. It was not a ship appearing on their long-range sensors. It was an event so strange, so outside the known parameters of their physics, that for a moment the sensor technicians believed it was a new form of attack by the silence itself. Spacetime in a vast, empty region several light hours from Catharia Prime began to shimmer. It was not a tear or a rupture like a wormhole opening. It was more subtle. The fabric of reality itself seemed to thaw. And becoming translucent. Distant stars viewed through the area appeared distorted, their light bending in impossible ways. The Cathar fleet, arrayed in a final, hopeless defensive perimeter, trained every sensor on the anomaly. Gravimetric sensors screamed warnings, detecting mass values that fluctuated between that of a small moon and a galactic cluster from 1 microsecond to the next. Then they arrived. They did not arrive through hyperspace or warp drives. They simply resolved. Out of the shimmering, translucent veil, they emerged not as ships, but as monoliths of impossible scale and design. They were not the crude, brutish kinetic vessels the Cathar had expected. There were no visible engines, no weapon ports, no viewports. They were vast, crystalline structures, shaped like impossibly complex geometric solids, their facets shifting and changing as if they were fourth-dimensional objects casting a three-dimensional shadow. Their hulls were a milky, pearlescent white, and they did not reflect the light of the nearby star. They seemed to absorb it, glowing from within with a soft, steady luminescence. They were beautiful, and there were so many. They did not arrange themselves in battle formations. They spread out, forming a perfect spherical shell around the encroaching edge of the voracious silence. A fleet of moons, a navy of celestial architecture. It was not a fleet built for war. It was a fleet built to move worlds. On the dais in the obsidian spire, the tactical display flickered, struggling to classify the new arrivals. They did not register as ships. They registered as gravitational anomalies, as pockets of stable, alternate physics. Kalen stood beside Vorlag, his warrior's arrogance shattered, replaced by a profound, reverent awe. "What are they?" the general whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in Vorlag's memory. Before Vorlag could answer, a communication request came through. It was not a hail on military channels or a standard diplomatic frequency. It was a gentle, resonant pulse sent directly to their neural comms network, a polite knock on the door of their collective consciousness. It was a human signal, but of a clarity and elegance that made the Cathar's own technology feel archaic. With a trembling hand, Vorlag gestured for the connection to be opened. The chamber filled not with a voice, but with a presence. It was a sense of calm, of profound and patient empathy. Then the words came, translated perfectly into the Cathar's most formal dialect, the syllables shaped with an artist's precision. "This is Ambassador Eva Rostova of the Terran Concordance, Aegis Division. We received your data package. Grand Sovereign Vorlag, we are here to help." The simplicity of the statement was a physical blow. No posturing, no demands, no condescension, just a calm, clear statement of fact. Help, a word the Cathar had removed from their diplomatic lexicon eons ago. Vorlag struggled to find his own voice. "Ambassador, your ships, they are not as our intelligence described." A soft, low sound came across the channel, a sound their translators tagged as gentle amusement. "Intelligence reports tend to focus on military assets. The ships you observed in the past belong to our colonial and defense arms. They are adequate for their purpose. This is the Aegis fleet. Our purpose is different. We are not soldiers. We are engineers, cosmic custodians, you might say." Engineers. Vorlag looked at the vast, glowing monoliths arrayed against the absolute black of the silence. They were not warships. They were tools. And the Cathar, for all their ancient power, could not even begin to fathom what they were designed to build, or unbuild. "You intend to fight the silence?" Kalen interjected, his voice raw with disbelief. "We have thrown the power of suns at it. It does not fight, it consumes." "Correct, General," the human voice replied, its calm unbroken. "You cannot fight a fire with a sword. You must remove its fuel or change the nature of the fire itself. The voracious silence, as you call it, is a complex problem in entropic cascade mechanics. A fascinating one, actually. Our xenotechnologists have been eager to study a sample on this scale. We have encountered similar phenomena before, but never one so voracious." The casual, academic tone with which the humans spoke of their extinction-level threat was more shocking than any display of force could have been. They were not afraid. They were curious. "What will you do?" Vorlag asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "We will begin by establishing a resonance fence," Ambassador Rostova explained. "The nanites that constitute the silence operate on a quantum communicative hive frequency. Our vessels, we call them harmonizers, will project a counter-frequency. This should, in theory, isolate vast sections of the swarm, breaking it from a cohesive whole into inert, non-communicative clouds. Think of it as introducing static to a conversation, rendering it meaningless." As she spoke, the Cathar watched in stunned silence as the glowing human vessels began to act. They emitted no energy beams, fired no projectiles. Instead, a low, pervasive hum filled the void, a sound that was felt in the bones of their ships and the very structure of spacetime. The edge of the voracious silence, which had been a perfectly sharp, defined line of absolute nothingness, began to blur, churn. Vast swaths of it seemed to lose their coherence, dissolving from a solid front of black into a roiling, chaotic fog of gray. The relentless advance had stopped. "The fence is holding," Rostova's voice announced with quiet satisfaction. "Now for the second phase, we will deploy the recalibrators. These vessels will project contained stasis fields into the neutralized clouds, freezing the nanites at a quantum level. From there, it is a simple, if energy-intensive, matter of reversing their core programming. We will instruct them to deconstruct themselves back into the base elements from which they were formed. The Cathar watched as a second wave of human vessels, sleeker and more focused in design, moved forward. They projected beams of what looked like pure, stable reality into the gray clouds. Where the beams touched, the gray mist shimmered and then vanished. In its place, vast, glittering clouds of hydrogen, helium, carbon, and iron began to appear, the raw materials of creation reclaimed from the jaws of uncreation. The humans were not destroying the silence. They were editing it out of existence, restoring the universe to its factory settings. It is impossible, Lyraxis breathed from her position in the spire. This is a level of matter-energy manipulation that our most advanced theories predicted was only possible at the birth of the universe. It is merely a matter of understanding the operating system, the human ambassador's voice explained gently. The universe has rules. The silence is a virus that exploits a loophole in those rules. We are simply patching the exploit. We would be honored to share the principles with your scientists once the immediate crisis has been abated. An offer of aid followed by an offer of knowledge, freely given. The foundations of Cathar philosophy, of sovereign solitude, of their millennia of proud isolation, were crumbling into dust, just as the silence was. Vorlag felt a profound sense of vertigo, as if the ground of his entire existence had been ripped out from under him. They had been so proud of their wisdom, their ancient traditions. But they had been like a man sitting alone in a locked room, believing he was the master of his domain, while outside, the universe was having a conversation they had never even known was possible. Ambassador Rostova, Vorlag said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. It was humility, gratitude, shame, and awe all mingled into one. Why would you do this? We are not your allies. We have never offered you aid. We have held you in contempt. Why expend such effort, such resources, for a species that has given you no reason to? There was a pause on the human channel. For the first time, the calm, professional tone seemed to soften, replaced by something deeper, something more personal. It was the sound of a philosophy that had been forged not in quiet contemplation, but in the crucible of great suffering and greater compassion. Because a long time ago, on a small, fragile world of our own, Eva Rostova's voice replied, we learned a very painful lesson. We learned that the dark is vast and cold, and the lights of civilization are small and few. We learned that when a neighbor's house is on fire, you do not lock your own door and celebrate your safety. You carry a bucket of water, because you understand that the fire will spread and soon your own house will be burning. But more than that, you carry the water because you remember what it feels like to be trapped in the flames. You remember the terror of being alone. She paused, and the weight of her next words settled over the Cathar like a blanket of stars. We received your final testament, Sovereign Vorlag. It was a noble gesture. But the core tenet of the Terran Concordance is this: there are no final testaments. There are no silent goodbyes. As long as one of us stands, no one stands alone against the dark. You are not alone, we are here. In the obsidian spire, built to honor the strength of a solitary empire, the old, tired sovereign of the Cathar Imperium lowered his head. And for the first time in his 1,000-year life, he understood the true meaning of power. It was not the ability to stand alone. It was the strength to stand together. The mighty fleet had landed, and it had brought with it not weapons of war, but a truth that would remake their civilization forever. The process of reclamation was a symphony of cosmic engineering on a scale the Cathar could barely comprehend. The human fleet, the Aegis Divisi, moved with the quiet, focused precision of master artisans restoring a priceless work of art. The harmonizers maintained the resonance fence, a shimmering wall of disruptive frequencies that kept the main body of the voracious silence at bay, while the recalibrators worked their way inward, disassembling the neutralized clouds of nanites with methodical grace. The Cathar fleet, under the command of a humbled and awestruck General Kalen, was given a simple but vital task: to act as sentinels. They formed a protective cordon around the human vessels, ensuring that no stray cosmic debris or unforeseen spatial anomaly could disrupt the delicate work being undertaken. It was the first joint operation in the history of both species. Sovereign Vorlag had extended an invitation for Ambassador Rostova to address the High Council, but the human diplomat had politely declined a formal visit to the planet's surface, citing the operational demands of the ongoing reclamation. Instead, she had offered something else, something the Cathar found even more profound: an open invitation for a Cathar delegation to board her flagship, the Stellarin Resolve. Vorlag had selected Lyraxis and Kalen to go, the two opposing poles of the debate that had led to this moment. He knew that what they witnessed would shape the future of their people. The Cathar shuttle, a vessel of polished obsidian and glowing circuitry, felt primitive and almost barbaric as it approached the human flagship. The Stellarin Resolve was not a ship in any conventional sense. It was a habitat, a laboratory, and a cathedral to science all in one, a vast, kilometers-long structure of interlocking crystalline rings that rotated slowly, not for artificial gravity, but for reasons their sensors could not decipher, related to harmonic field stabilization. As they were guided into a docking bay large enough to contain a small city, they saw no armed guards, no military formality. They saw engineers and scientists of the human species, moving with a calm, unhurried purpose. The diversity was startling. Humans of all shapes, sizes, and colors worked side by side, their collaboration seamless. They were met not by an honor guard, but by a single figure. Ambassador Eva Rostova was smaller than they had anticipated, her form lacking the rigid, imposing carapace of a Cathar noble. She was encased in the soft vulnerability of her species, yet her presence filled the vast hangar. Her eyes, a deep and startling blue, held a warmth and intelligence that was both disarming and commanding. "Archivist Lyraxis, General Kalen, welcome aboard the Stellarin Resolve," she said, her voice the same one they had heard over the comms, imbued with a natural empathy. "I apologize for the informal setting. We are, as you can see, quite busy." Kalen, who had spent his life meeting alien dignitaries with displays of martial power and rigid protocol, found himself at a loss. He performed a stiff, formal bow, the highest gesture of respect in Cathar culture. "Ambassador, your fleet has accomplished what we believe to be impossible. The word gratitude is insufficient to express what my people feel." Rostova inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. "It is our duty, General, and our privilege. Please walk with me." She led them through the corridors of the ship. They were not the cold, metallic hallways of a warship. They were wide, filled with natural light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, and lined with living plants from 100 different worlds. Humans they passed would often pause, smile at the ambassador, and then continue on their way, their focus absolute but their demeanor relaxed. There was no fear here, no rigid hierarchy. There was only purpose. "We have been observing your species for some time," Lyraxis said, her archivist's curiosity overriding her diplomatic caution. "We saw chaos, emotion, inefficiency. We were wrong. How could we have misjudged you so completely?" Rostova smiled, a subtle, sad expression. "You saw what was on the surface, and you were not entirely wrong. We are a chaotic species. We feel deeply. We fight, we love, we grieve, we create with a passion that often borders on self-destruction. For much of our history, that chaos nearly consumed us. We learned to manage it the hard way." She gestured to a large viewport. Outside, a recalibrator vessel was bathing a cloud of gray dust in its reality-altering beam, and a new nebula, vibrant with the colors of nascent hydrogen and oxygen, was being born from the ashes of the silence. "We discovered that our greatest weakness was also our greatest strength," Rostova continued. "Our emotional capacity, our individuality, it makes us unpredictable, but it is also the source of our empathy. It is the engine of our innovation. We do not suppress our chaos. We have learned to channel it. We build systems, societies, and technologies that are not rigid but resilient, flexible. They are designed to bend without breaking, to adapt to the unexpected. Your society, if I may be so bold, is one of perfect crystalline order. It is magnificent, but when a crystal is struck with enough force, it does not bend. It shatters." Her words struck Kalen with the force of a physical blow. He saw it then, the truth of it. The Cathar Imperium was a perfect ancient crystal, and the voracious silence was the hammer blow that was shattering it. The humans, they were not a crystal. They were a river. They flowed around obstacles, they adapted their course, and their power was not in their rigidity, but in their relentless, ever-changing momentum. They arrived at the ship's command center. It was not a bridge, but a vast, open arboretum. In the center, under a canopy of alien trees, a holographic display far more advanced than the one in the obsidian spire showed the entire operation in real time. Humans sat at consoles that seemed to grow out of the living floor, their fingers dancing over interfaces of light, their minds connected directly to the ship's systems. They were integrated, a harmonious fusion of biology and technology. "This is the heart of the Aegis," Rostova said softly. Our philosophy made manifest. We do not conquer the universe. We seek to understand it, to tend to it. We see ourselves not as rulers, but as gardeners in a cosmos that is far more wild and dangerous than most young races can imagine. You said you have encountered threats like this before, Lyraxis pressed, her mind racing to catalog these revelations. What other dangers are there? Rostova's expression grew serious, the light in her eyes dimming with the memory of ancient sorrows. The universe is full of existential threats. Some, like the silence, are mindless, like a cosmic disease. Others are not. There are intelligences that exist on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. Beings who see entire galaxies as resources to be consumed. Predatory ideas that can infect a civilization's information networks and drive it to madness. We have faced them. We have lost. We have won. Each time we learn, we adapt, and we grow stronger not just in our technology but in our conviction. She turned to face them, her gaze direct and unwavering. The doctrine of sovereign solitude is a beautiful, noble idea, General Archivist, but it is the logic of a child who believes that closing their eyes will make the monsters in the dark disappear. The monsters are real, and the only way to face them is to open your eyes and reach for the hand of the person standing next to you. In that moment, Lyraxis understood. The humans were not just saving the Cathar, they were teaching them. They were offering them a new way to exist, a philosophy forged in the fires of a history the Cathar had never had to endure. They had been protected by their isolation, but it had also left them fragile. The humans had suffered, and that suffering had made them strong in ways the Cathar had never conceived of. Their compassion was not a weakness, it was a weapon, the most powerful weapon in their arsenal. It was the driving force behind this mighty fleet, behind this impossible technology. It was the why that Vorlag had asked for. The reclamation of the Cathar systems took many more cycles, but its outcome was never in doubt. The final bastion of the voracious silence, a concentrated nexus of the swarm that had formed around the corpse of the Cathar's former star bastion at Cygnus X1, was the last to be unmade. The human fleet converged, their harmonizers and recalibrators working in perfect concert. With a final, silent pulse of energy that warped light and gravity for 1,000,000 kilometers, the last vestiges of the silence were rewritten. Where there had been a hole in the universe, a wound of absolute nothingness, there was now a nascent, swirling cloud of pristine elements, the raw material for new stars and new worlds. The war was over, a war that had been won without a single shot being fired. A new Grand Council was convened in the Obsidian Spire. The air was different now. The ancient coldness was still there, but it was no longer the chill of a tomb. It was the crisp, clean air of a world reborn. The holographic map no longer showed a spreading stain of black, but the steady, familiar golds and blues of their restored territory, with a new, vibrant green sector marking the presence of the Terran Concordance fleet, which remained in orbit, assisting with the complex task of stabilizing the newly restored star systems. Sovereign Vorlag stood before his council, but he was a different ruler. The cracks in his carapace no longer seemed like signs of weariness, but like the revered patina of age, a symbol of wisdom gained through hardship. Today, he began, his voice echoing in the vast chamber, we are not here to mourn our losses but to celebrate our future, a future that was given back to us. For millennia, we have lived by the docked Rhine of sovereign solitude. We believed it was the path of honor, the mark of a great civilization. We were wrong. It was the path of arrogance. It was the mark of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of weakness, and most of all, fear of connection. He looked at Kalen, who met his gaze with one of profound, humbled respect. He looked at Lyraxis, whose quiet courage had saved them all. The humans, a species we dismissed as young and chaotic, have taught us a lesson that our 10,000 years of history could not. They have shown us that true strength is not found in isolation, but in unity. True power is not the ability to destroy, but the will to protect. And true wisdom is not in knowing all the answers, but in being brave enough to ask for help when you have none. He paused, letting the truth of his words settle into the ancient stones of the spire. Therefore, I, Grand Sovereign of the Cathar Imperium, do hereby declare the doctrine of sovereign solitude to be null and void. We will cast aside our pride and our fear. We will reach out our hand to the Terran Concordance, not as a defeated people seeking a protector, but as a reborn civilization seeking a partner. We will form an alliance, an unbreakable bond, so that we may face the future, and whatever darkness it may hold together. A wave of assent, a deep, resonant chorus rose from the council. It was a sound of release, of a great burden being lifted from the soul of a civilization. The Cathar, for the first time in their long history, were no longer alone. Later, in a private communication between the Obsidian Spire and the Stellaran Resolve, Vorlag formally conveyed his government's proposal to Ambassador Rostova. The human diplomat accepted with a grace and warmth that was now familiar. "We are honored to accept your offer of alliance, Sovereign Vorlag," Rostova said, her image shimmering in the air before the dais. "The Terran Concordance believes that the galaxy is made stronger with every voice that joins the chorus. We have much to learn from you, from your history, your art, your wisdom." "It is we who have much to learn," Vorlag corrected her gently. "You speak of other threats, of dangers in the wider cosmos. We wish to understand. We wish to contribute, to stand beside you not as subjects, but as equals." A flicker of something complex and somber crossed Rostova's face. "Your willingness to help is a testament to the new path you have chosen, Sovereign, and you are right. There is more. The reason the Aegis Division exists, the reason we have developed this technology and this philosophy, it is not simply because of the random existential threats that arise in the universe." She hesitated, as if weighing the burden of the knowledge she was about to share. "We did not seek you out. We came because you called, but our primary mission for the last century has been focused elsewhere, on a signal, one that does not originate from our galaxy." The ambassador gestured, and the holographic map in the spire shifted. The familiar swirl of their own galaxy shrank, becoming a small island of light in a much larger, darker sea. A thin, faint line appeared, originating from a point far, far away in the blackness of intergalactic space, and aimed toward the center of a neighboring galaxy. "We first detected it 150 of our years ago," Rostova explained, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "It is an incredibly ancient, incredibly powerful, and incredibly faint transmission. It took us decades to isolate and decode it. It is not a message of greeting. It is not a cry for help. It is a warning." The image on the map zoomed in on the signal's destination, a massive spiral galaxy much larger than their own. And then data overlays began to appear, translated from the ancient warning. They showed not a civilization, but a force, an intelligence that operated on a galactic scale. The Cathar had called their enemy the voracious silence. The ancient signal called this enemy the harvester of thought. It did not consume matter. It consumed consciousness. It moved from world to world, from civilization to civilization, and it did not kill them. It absorbed them. It took their art, their science, their memories, their souls, and added them to its own gestalt consciousness, leaving behind perfectly preserved, empty shells on silent, dead worlds. "The signal is a lament," Rostova said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was sent by the last free species in that galaxy just before they were harvested. They used the last of their energy to send this warning, a final testament aimed at any who might be listening. They wanted someone to know that they had existed, and they wanted to warn us about what was coming." The map shifted again, showing the projected path of the harvester's expansion. It moved slowly, patiently from one galaxy to the next, like a farmer moving from field to field, and its trajectory over the next several million ye. RS was aimed directly at their own cluster of galaxies. "The voracious silence you faced was a terrible cosmic horror," Rostova stated, her gaze meeting Vorlag's. "But it was a natural disaster, unthinking, unfeeling. This is something else. It is intelligent, it is patient, and it is hungry. The Aegis Division was created not just to fight fires, but to prepare for the storm that we know is coming. Your people, Sovereign, were the first true test of our philosophy on a grand scale. You have shown us that unity is possible." Vorlag stared at the map, at the terrifying, implacable advance of this new, greater darkness. His own civilization's near extinction, the event that had defined his entire existence, was now relegated to a mere prelude, a footnote in a much larger, more terrifying saga. The mighty human fleet had not just been mighty in its power to save. It was mighty in its purpose, in its willingness to look into the greatest darkness imaginable and not flinch. He thought of the name of their new allies, the Terran Concordance, a quiet agreement, an understanding, and he thought of the name of Rostova's fleet, the Aegis. In the ancient myths of humanity, it was a shield. He finally understood. Humanity was not expanding erratically. They were building a wall. They were not just exploring the galaxy, they were fortifying it. They were not sending out colonists. They were sending out watchmen to the furthest, darkest corners of the universe. They had looked into the abyss, and instead of despairing, they had chosen to build a shield large enough to protect everyone. "We will stand with you," Vorlag said, his voice no longer that of a sovereign of a single empire, but of a citizen of a much larger galactic community. The fear he felt was immense, a cold dread that touched the core of his being. But for the first time, it was not a paralyzing fear. It was a clarifying one. He was not alone. They were not alone. The mighty fleet had landed, and they had thought no one would come, but they had been wrong. Someone had come, and they had brought with them a terrible, wondrous truth. The universe was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined, but they would not have to face it by themselves. The age of sovereign solitude was over. The age of the Aegis had just begun.